is the Cloud Security Today podcast, where leaders learn how to get cloud security done. And now your host, Matt Chiodi.
We've had a lot of public sector guests on the show over the last couple of months. And the reason I've chosen to do this is, quite frankly, I find the progress in the US government around cloud to be extremely interesting topic. And I think that even if you are not in the public sector and you're private, that you can pull a lot of useful information and learnings out of these episodes. So on today's podcast, I am interviewing Rob Brown, who is the CTO at the US Citizenship and Immigration Services Group. And we really talk about the transition that they have gone through and just how they are extracting value out of the cloud. Rob, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Appreciate it.
So Rob, first of all, for those of us who don't know all of these awesome government acronyms, I know we're going to be dropping a lot of them over the next couple minutes here on the podcast. First of all, what is USCIS? What do you guys do? And what is your role at USCIS?
Sure. So first, USCIS is United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. We are a component of Department of Homeland Security. And really, we provide, sort of the official statement would be, we provide lawful immigration. But I'd like to state that, because I am also a customer, we actually provide benefits to the globe. We actually provide the American dream, or the ability for folks to achieve the American dream by ultimately providing citizenship through the various life cycle of benefits that this agency, USCIS, provides. Myself, I'm actually hail from Canada. I've gone through the process of becoming naturalized, and thought it was such a great mission, I actually became an employee. And what I do at USCIS is I'm actually the Chief Technology Officer, and really with a focus on, right now, a lot of focus on trying to streamline a lot of the benefits becoming digital. Streamlining those processes. There's still a lot of Truman era-like processes that are at CIS. There's still a lot of paper in play here. So I've been actually working for a few years, just trying to work, not only streamline these processes, but also digitize a lot of this paper. Not easy when you talk about going through a lot of the government bureaucracy, but I feel at CIS, we've actually done a pretty good job and being leaders in a lot of technology initiatives, from DevSecOps to artificial intelligence and machine learning, to adopting some pretty cool platforms from Kafka to Kubernetes, and really sort of helping other agencies use or leverage what we've already done. It's a great place to work, really enjoy it, have an opportunity to constantly innovate and test and experiment, and actually start to turn real product, and seeing some of these actual efficiencies and streamlining and digitization efforts actually come to fruition.
That's awesome. So tell us, you've been there a number of years now, I believe, in this role. And I know that, from looking at some previous interviews that you've done, that you've actually accomplished, I think, quite a bit in what I think is a pretty short period of time there. So maybe if you could, for the audience, what are some of the accomplishments at USCIS that you are most proud of, maybe around cloud, in your time being there? Which ones really stand out?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the, and it's not just me, again, this is accomplishments writ large for the organization. This is definitely a team sport, and would not be able to do any of this with pretty skilled folks and good charisma, as well as good organic sort of collaboration with folks. But I think some of the major accomplishments was really moving the majority of our data and data processing into the cloud, and then ultimately democratizing that data in various manifestations, but just opening it up to the folks that really needed it. Some of the challenges we had in the past were just data copies all over the place. We've got sort of 7 large sort of clearing houses across the US, and just think of terabytes of data all over these clearinghouses, sometimes in multiple copies just there. So, providing a good common platform with the right governance and the right pipelines, and then the right tooling that is easy to use, has really opened up that aperture of people making data-driven decisions, people that wouldn't even be looking at data now actually leveraging data. And then ultimately, as we move forward, we've got a big push for and a plan to do sort of citizen data engineering and data scientists, so we can further expand the skill set in a safe, low drag way for folks to get even more out of the data. So that's been a big enabler just by having the cloud and having the infrastructure that we have in place, but also the people to make it happen.
I love that. And that's awesome. I didn't realize that you were originally you were from Canada. So that's pretty awesome. You are. I was wondering at first, you're like, I'm also a customer. I was like, how's that? So that's great. You actually are now on the other side of it, and you're actually helping to make it better for those that are coming through this process now and in the future. So thank you for doing that. So, any time that I've spoken with folks from the public sector side, and we're talking about bringing cloud into their environments. Now, I know you guys are a couple years into this now, but did you run into a lot of friction at the beginning with wanting to move these processes and data to the cloud? What was that like?
We have I would say about 95, if not more, of our applications today and services are actually now being delivered from the cloud. And we started this journey maybe 2016, 17 timeframe. So we're early adopters. I think the primary driver of that was the former CIO, Mark Schwartz, did a great job in just rallying the troops and really pushing the envelope on cloud adoption, which was wonderful. And it's, storming the beaches. You need to have the Green Berets out there just to break the headway and set things up. So at this stage, which we've done, again, having 95% of our workload in a cloud or clouds is I think it's pretty phenomenal still. But some of the real challenges to get there, of course, were security, and still is always. It's always the unknown, and I can't touch and feel. There's the other big challenge in getting there was skill set. At the time, cloud was still burgeoning, and really was, again, from a skill set, a lot of folks just did not have that skill set. So a lot of learning, a lot of classes, a lot of automation, a lot of Python. So that was probably a large part. I felt at some points we became more of a university for a lot of groups than just a contractor workshop or sweatshop cranking out product, which was great. The culture was awesome. I mean, just that, really good learning culture and experimenting and sharing and communicating with, the various challenges and having people jump in and, I did this over here, try this. So we're at a stage now where the pendulum, I think, has shifted a little bit. So the current challenges really are, how do we start to put levels of standards and governance in place so we can be a little bit more corporate, mainly in being more cost conscious, and as well as just how can we start to really think about reuse, and how can we get folks to think about certain libraries and certain frameworks. It does tend to have a little bit of kill of innovation to some degree, but we still need to think a little bit more corporately in how we move forward. Start to think about, you give developer the keys to AWS, and there goes your monthly spend. So there's a little bit of that going on, and trying to create some good tagging standards that we've done, and as well as just some good automation scripts to help ourselves be in check, so we don't have the manual sort of cloud janitors all over the place. We've done a lot of work in automating that, but that still has taken a lot of time, and it's also a bit of a culture shift, which some folks, at least the front office, definitely enjoy seeing some of the benefits. But it does take away from that sort of educational testing and experimentation mindset. Not to say that it's been dampened or killed at all. It's still very much prevalent, but there's always a little bit of a question. So the culture challenge is probably something that's the hardest right now.
So Rob, I want to, in a minute, I'll come back to your comment on security, because I definitely want to drill into that a little bit more. But you mentioned clouds, plural. So is the multi-cloud efforts at USCIS, are they mainly geared more towards supplier diversity, or why is it? Why you mentioned multi-cloud, and I found an article that I think you were interviewed back in April, where you said, I still believe multi-cloud is a ticket to ensure we're getting the best out of the best. Maybe if you can unpack that a little bit more for us, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having that marketplace keeps everybody honest. I think first and foremost, I think it's important to understand what that marketplace is, not only from cost, but what services, features, functions are available. It's not one cloud fits all. I think the latest term that I read here recently was it's multi-cloud is really called sky computing. So what does the sky computing really look like? What is that ecosystem starting to morph into? I think the great example, some of this has to do with security, some of this has to do with just, customer experience, is a good example of best of the best, or getting the best value for our dollar, or even this is what people know, or security. It's a little bit of all, is the general just basic, desktop apps, and having those served up from one cloud versus perhaps where you store the majority of your developed products and applications. That's possibly somewhere else because it's either known by the skill set, or it's better bang for the buck, or the actual services far exceed anybody else.
So, Rob, let's go back to the security comment that you made, and maybe let's put that in the context of multi-cloud, right? So every cloud is different. They all have their nuances, AWS, Azure, Google. There is little to no standardization, right, between the different large cloud service platforms. How did CIS handle that? How do you handle the security? What are some things maybe that, if another agency is listening to the podcast, where do they start? How did CIS handle this?
We started down this path because there was a business need to be multi-cloud. The specific example, through much ado and much pontification and even a little bit of sort of verbal back and forth in a constructive way, was moving off of on-prem or local apps, again, let's just say Office apps, to something that would be more robust and cost-effective, and take that, the term we all love so endearing is the undifferentiated heavy lifting off of folks and move it to some other group. From a security perspective, this was essentially almost like an easier path, or the defining moment again really was just a local app, and where's the best place for it to be. So that was our foray into really the multi-cloud or sky computing. Again, from a security perspective, the security folks were, again, from skill perspective, from what they knew, how they could start to actually put some controls around it and actually look at compliance. It really was less work for them based upon the resources that they had, as well as the CX was far superior for writ large for the majority of the community. The other approach that we took ended up actually writing an 8A contract, mainly because our security team really did not have the skill set or understanding of how to do basic sort of blocking and tackling outside of the current CSP that we were in. So the 8A really was sort of a multi-cloud security engineering contract. This was a few years ago that I wrote this, and we got it out, had a group come in and start to actually work through what does that look like? Is it a single GSS within one cloud to serve them all? Is it GSS per CSP? Or is it sort of a mothership with some federated pods out there that are reporting back? And there was other avenues to this based upon cost and based upon sort of intake, and how do you start to drive and move current demands to certain CSPs or clouds. That contract and the team running it along with the rest of the USCIS folks sort of helped set the foundation for us on really an approach, some of the basic security constructs that make a lot of sense for us, as well as made or helped our security folks have a higher level of confidence that movement into this sort of sky computing or multi-cloud arena was something palatable and doable. That was probably the most important piece to work through.
So maybe for some of our listeners, and myself included, maybe you can explain, what is an 8A contract?
Really, it's an ability to do a direct award to a company. It has a certain dollar threshold. But you have the ability to do a certain direct award to a group for a body of work that has other limitations and restrictions around it. But it's a faster way to get highly skilled folks in to do a pretty specific job, in a nutshell.
That makes sense. Prisma Cloud secures infrastructure, applications, data, and entitlements across the world's largest clouds, all from a single unified solution. With a combination of cloud service provider APIs and a unified agent framework, users gain unmatched visibility and protection. And for our federal customers, Prisma Cloud is now FedRAMP moderate. To find out more, go to prismacloud.io. One of the things that's become really popular over the last, I'd say, 2 years, and maybe this was probably even before or a little bit after you guys started into the cloud journey, but I'm curious how zero trust factors into how USCIS is approaching the cloud to make it more secure. Where are you guys at on your zero trust journey? What does that look like for you?
We've had a few fits and starts over the past 2 years, I would say. We've made some sort of experimental forays into zero trust on the networking side, on the application side, and just recently, within the past few months, have really started to move out on zero trust, looking at what's really coming up with the appropriate implementation plan, understanding, baselining our operational capabilities and not codifying it, but getting agreement across all of the IT sort of divisions that would be responsible or have a party in zero trust, which we have done. And we've started to look at the baseline or alignment of those operational capabilities as to what we have, or at least what we think we have, to satisfy those capabilities, and then ultimately start to prove it out. So we're at a stage now where I think we've got a decent understanding and baseline aligned to a ZTA implementation plan with core operational capabilities. Now it's testing those out and ensuring that it meets the muster. I think we are pretty lucky, and we've got, again, a very good security team and a pretty savvy group of application developers and infrastructure folks that really take security and shift it as far to the left as possible. But there's still coordination, there's still alignment, and there's still a lot of unknowns as just writ large as to what it really is zero trust. Where I think we're at a stage now of coming up with that lingua franca and that common lexicon, which I think is probably some of the most important things you can do. That's still sort of underway, and getting that sort of lexicon out to all the parties that play and the stakeholders. And we've also started to do some experimentation, pretty targeted experimentation in microsegmentation. How does that look like? Can we start to develop patterns here that could be derived from either a framework or potential libraries, something that could be contributed to in a Git repo or repos? So that's sort of where my head's at and where we've actually started to move out on.
So I'm curious. So you mentioned microsegmentation there right at the end when we were kind of in this soliloquy on zero trust. How do you see microsegmentation playing into A, in the cloud, and then B, around a zero trust strategy? What is that? How do you at least picture that? I understand that, you guys may not have it today, but when you look at, the next, 18 to 24 months, what does that look like?
Well, first, I think it's probably the hardest nut to crack to some degree. Others may say differently, but from where we sit and how we're structured, not only culturally, organizationally, our communication patterns, even I would say our technical debt, it's probably going to be the most challenging. That's why I think experimenting here is the most important place to experiment. I think that, coupled with some software-defined networking constructs, cloud and otherwise, because we do have some constraints on basically compliance and security constraints on what we can and can't do, is pretty important. I don't think any of this is seriously insurmountable or challenging. I think it goes back to people and culture. And ideally, from some of these experiments, the goal is to, again, come up with reusable patterns, find out where the chinks are, and most likely those will be some of the legacy lift and shift apps that we've got in the cloud. And we'll sort of take those in stride, but work with sort of the high-performing folks that do have a cadence of delivering multiple times a day, or at least a couple times a week, where we can get some good wins and test from there.
One of the things that I often get asked from customers and clients, public sector, private sector, is, you mentioned the number of challenges that USCIS had when moving to the cloud, and I'm sure some of these are still challenges today. You mentioned security, the skill sets, cost efficiencies. Is there a way that you are tracking progress on that, right? I mean, there's always been a lot of talks, and especially in security, around metrics, but also on the IT side of the house. Are there certain metrics that you look at least at a high level, just to see, hey, we were at X, at this date, and now we're at Y or X minus Y? How do you know if you're winning the ball game? I'm curious how you at least think through that.
I'll take it purely from sort of a DevSecOps perspective. There are definitely metrics that we do look at. Deployment frequency, there's quality, and quality is sort of, okay, what does that really mean? We've got a decent way to measure quality, from static code analysis to some CX and UX measurements that we've got, as well as just the litany of other same old, from SLAs to MTTRs and you name it. But and we've been tracking this, and actually have put a policy in place for this sort of work. Geez, I think I was a contractor back at the time, so this is probably 5 years ago. So we have at least 5 years of data that's similar. I would say it's very akin or very similar to sort of some of the work that Jez Humble had done in the past, and some of those folks had done in the past with sort of the DevOps playbook and how do you measure DevOps. Really a lot of big borrowing from those folks and some maturing along the way. Some of the other sort of newer measurements I think that are more important is, of course, just basic security and alignment to some of those release metrics over time, which always has seemed to have been disjointed and not aggregated. So we've started to do that collection. And I think the other area that to me is even more important is, as we're starting to move from more of a project-based, so you can imagine sort of a agile fall, not that we're an agile fall, but that there are some of that exists. I think the mentality from a personnel and contracting perspective is very agile fall. As we look at more of the dynamic teaming and reteaming, and slowly moving into a sort of a product mindset, those sorts of metrics or flow metrics, I think, are very important, because they can illustrate where it's really not technical debt. A lot of this just has to do with churn or contract turnover or just general people things. There's still a lot of maturity in that sort of hygiene area that I think will make USCIS way more efficient and be able to do a lot more.
So a lot of organizations, they struggle with silos inside of them, right? And those silos can create friction. They can slow time to production. I guess my question for you is how is the move to cloud, to DevSecOps, how has that maybe helped you to mitigate some of those challenges? Obviously, you guys aren't perfect. Nobody's perfect. But I'm curious, how have you seen cloud actually facilitate maybe doing away with some of those silos challenges, or at least addressing them?
I just go back to some of the learning aspects and the sharing of, essentially creating our own Stack Overflow so that people can share, learn, and understand. That's definitely helped bust some of the boundaries and the silos, but that's only at a sort of a technical engineering level. The real silos get generated, I think, where the money flows and who's ultimately making decisions as to what work should be done. So I think the cloud has enabled the ability to see the work in flight through various standards, various platforms and tools, et cetera, that we've got in place. So I think it's starting from the top down and illustrating some of what's actually happening on the ground to sort of business decision makers, so that they're able to and will be able to see, again, sort of what's in flight, where some of the team's long pulls are. For example, if you have multiple teams working on one product and there's a dependency and just doing general on-prem type of work, typically that was very difficult. Now with the appropriate standards and certain governance in place, I can start to highlight that work very quickly and very easily with cloud-like tools, as well as just with the cloud in general, from infrastructure, but also just releases and deployment. And as we start to sort of centralize and aggregate on certain platforms, that just exposes it even more with the appropriate standards or metadata in place to track it. So working that at the higher level and having those sort of business decision makers in a group so they can make data-driven, based upon what we've just discussed, decisions on where should we move or what's the priority, definitely will help. I think the cloud has also just helped back to just enabling, to some degree, on the PaaS side, not so much on maybe software delivery, but on the PaaS side, leveraging more sort of citizen development tool sets or platforms that has given more exposure to more folks writ large. So they may, instead of just building a whole app, they're able to or take a old sort of locally developed app at one of these service centers that exist or clearinghouses. These folks now have a capability in a safe manner with a unified pipeline, can now just build the facet or feature or function that they need pretty quickly. And communities of practice have sprung up around some of these efforts and platforms that have helped break down a lot of these silos. That's still a work in progress, but I've definitely seen a lot of promise there.
So I'm curious, you use the term unified pipeline, which is something that I think a lot of organizations are after, or are somewhere in that process of trying to get to that. I'm curious from your perspective and just some of the benefits you've seen. And we talked a little bit about DevSecOps, but how has working towards a unified pipeline, how has that helped with DevSecOps and automating some of the maybe the security controls? And maybe, I don't know, you can throw in there, I'm curious to see, are you guys making heavy use of containers and infrastructure as code? How does that all come together for you guys?
Absolutely. It definitely makes a difference. And so just, again, a little bit of history to provide more context. So the adoption to the cloud, we're talking many years ago. Again, it was very rogue. It was great for learning, great for sharing, but ultimately what it ended up doing was probably creating some of those silos. Everybody had their own pipeline, everybody had their own Jenkins server, everybody had their own way of doing unit testing, everybody had their own suite of automation tools, and they could be, everybody could be writing Java and coding in Java. It didn't matter. So moving out on sort of unified pipelines, and I would say for just for delivering a product that's either from an infrastructure perspective, from a machine learning perspective, to even just an application, or some platform that's delivering value from in a citizen development type of a manner, has definitely has paid some dividends. And that's just a constant work in progress. But we have been able to sort of standardize on the majority of the platforms that we use, mainly from infrastructure as code, application development, so that the security folks, so that the infrastructure folks, the networking folks, as well as just release management, and again, back to sort of the business of IT, we can start to see really what's happening and draw data from all of this information. So having some of the standardized tools from tip to tail, and I'd just say from product management, Jira as an example, to deployment, which could be right now predominantly is Kubernetes clusters, it has been very fruitful, but still a lot of work. And as far as the security tooling, really, I think we've embedded a lot of good security tools, from some pretty simple to relatively advanced static code analysis tool sets to container scanning tools, either in stasis and a registry to at runtime, and have aligned those to DHS STIGs, to various other compliance standards, so we actually get real-time information. And at this stage, we're also working out with and embedding this in the pipeline, the ability to do dependency management writ large. I think we've got about probably more than half the organization covered just in dependency management, which is wonderful. And embedding that ideally into the IDE of the developers, so even before they do a pull request, they can see what nonsense they may be introducing into the environment. But the standardization to me has been very critical in really creating some of these unified pipelines. Otherwise, best of luck. You're never going to know, especially as you move into if folks do move into a more of a decentralized microservice serverless world, you definitely are going to need to have some level of orchestration, not just, of course, for your pods or your containers, but also for how it's being run and managed, the pipelines, as well as just the general product hygiene writ large. And that's really where I would recommend folks start, and maybe also start at the deployment end and sort of meet in the middle and have the various constructs in place like security, quality, automation as the core tenets of building out the frameworks in between.
So when you think about cloud leaders in the federal government, who are some of your peers that you look to for best practices, and maybe kind of open it up for some of us that day to day in public sector, what does that look like in terms of collaboration?
So a lot of good collaboration I've had with a lot of my DHS colleagues, other CTOs at DHS, CBP and ICE and FEMA and HQ, We all speak with frequency, regularity, both sort of formal and informal, which is great. So it's nice to have that those relationships and that network in place, because we share ideas all the time, not just with cloud, but just general sort of organizational constructs, and how do we communicate, and how do we implement to sort of reverse Conway's law a little bit better, and architectural principles to changing how we talk to each other. So a lot of folks just within DHS are very brilliant, very bright people, and it's great to actually work with them and bounce ideas off of them. And I would say right now, as far as some of the major initiatives that we're currently working on, is just, what does cloud data sharing look like? That's a biggie for us, as you can very well imagine, with a lot of the challenges that exist today, and managing the various functional mission-oriented facets of those organizations, and the data that would enable the other organizations to be faster, cheaper, and better. So the cloud data sharing is a biggie right now.
I love that. Well, Rob, I've loved our conversation today. So, one of the questions, or one of the things that I love to ask leaders is, how do you stay on top of things, right? Because all the research shows that leaders. So my question for you is how do you stay on top of things in, maybe from a cybersecurity perspective? Let's drill down to that. What do you read? What do you watch?
Definitely a lot of reading, and I'm just a nerd. But I would also say, at least personally, experimentation and hands-on keyboard. Definitely not much of a policy guy, or that's just bores the heck out of me. But actually really doing experimentation, testing products, doing, AOAs, so I can understand the value and benefit we're getting from certain tools and platforms, and just going all out and balls out and testing this stuff out is to me, I think, probably the best way to be in touch and stay in touch with technology. Of course, reading is great, and great ideas, just get spawned from some of those late night sessions or early morning sessions on the porch. But, applying them, or at least testing them, I think has been really beneficial for me.
So if our listeners want to connect with you, maybe learn a little bit more about you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I think the best way is through email, or probably just email, actually, or I don't even know. There's Twitter handles, and probably LinkedIn is also another great way for reaching out as well. Love to talk to anybody who has some great ideas and wants to talk core tech or advanced tech, and plenty of things we'd like to talk about, and find really good talent to actually come and help us at CIS. We need the help. It's a great mission, and a lot of cool stuff going on, and it's definitely not for the faint of heart. But if you're into some cutting edge tech, at least maybe bleeding edge, but it's a great place to work.
Sounds like you're hiring. Are you hiring?
Absolutely. Always.
All right. So the question is going to be, where do they go to look for jobs at USCIS?
So there is usajobs.com, and there's also areas within Monster to go and find plenty of spots on. And we just announced a position here, I think it was on Friday, to work in our software delivery group. That's probably the best place, and just do a keyword search on USCIS and see what pops up.
Awesome. Well, Rob, enjoyed having you today on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
I appreciate it all. Thanks very much, Matt. Take care.
See you.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. To find out more, please visit us at cloudsecuritytoday.com.